In Orkney, we used to have an expression, "I'll be hour with the moon," meaning that I would come and visit you when the moon is full to light my way. Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of Hour with the Moon. The moon is shining bright tonight, although it's the middle of the day here and it's not actually the full moon. But you can. Wonders of technology. So we've got a visitor. We've got a virtual visitor this time. Absolutely delighted to welcome an amazing storyteller and harp player, Heather Yule, who we've kent each other for a pretty while now.
Aye, that's for sure.
We'll maybe kind of keep it quiet as to how long. You haven't changed. Have you got a picture in your attic or something?
Oh, that's very kind, Tom. But yes, if you looked closely, you'd see the change. But I've got good genes, as they say. But I'm lucky.
Yeah, you don't have to look very hard with me. I mean, you'd see it for half a mile away. Anyway, never mind. Fabulous to have you here, though. And I mean, well, we met in Shetland.
We did. And I don't even know how long ago that was, but it was a while. And it's just...
I do, but you probably don't want to hear it. It was 2001.
It was a few decades ago.
Yeah.
Believe it or not.
Well, 2001 it was, and Lawrence invited us up.
Aye.
It was kind of, there. We're having a first storytelling festival up in Shetland. And so that was it. That we were on the hit list.
Yeah, it was just of the memories of some of the adventures that the three of us had, plus other wonderful characters like Bob Pegg and some of these other storytellers. But Lawrence was just, he was good at gathering together some really wonderful people. Yeah, good memories.
Happy guy. And I think, one of those things that you always remember in life was phoning you up one Wednesday afternoon. It was a dreich day, and it was chucking it down. It was aching. It was grey skies. It was horrible. And phoned you up and said, "Fancy going to Iceland?"
I know, that was so exciting. I still remember you calling, and I must have been dancing around the house afterwards. The idea of going to Iceland with yourselves, but yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah, it was Hjorleifur who we've had on this program.
That's right, yeah.
On this podcast. It was his sister-in-law, Austa, was organising a festival around Iceland. And she had, of course, met me and Lawrence in Orkney. It was through an EU project. And she'd met Bob Pegg as well. So they were on the list, and they said, we would like a woman storyteller as well, just for a bit of balance, And I said, well, I can exactly the person. So get you a call, and there you were. So
yeah, I was signed up immediately, and myself and my harp were happy to get on that plane. And it was one of those amazing kind of times, because it actually wasn't that long that we were there, but it felt like it was longer, because we packed in so much, and they took us to see so many things, and there were so many incredible. I had to assure Davey, my husband, when I got back, that I had been working, because it sounded like we'd just been having fun the whole time. There had been some actual work in terms of storytelling for performances, but you had a significant birthday that time, and I remember just we didn't. None of us got much sleep. It was Iceland in the summer. There was light. It was light all day and night. So and we met that incredible man with the harp that was made that he was a sculptor, I believe, with stone sculpture, and he found all these incredible pieces of stone. A lot the way that the stone is there is that you can, if you hit it, you get, it's a certain type of I don't know my geology, but of stone that creates a pure sound, a pure pitch. And do you remember he had those amazing kind of marimbas made of stone, and Evelyn Glennie's photograph, the Scottish percussionist, the wee photograph in the corner, because she was his, to him, she was a goddess of percussion, and there he was in his little hobbit house playing music for us, and lots of things like that happened. It was a magic time.
Yeah, he was going around the hills and striking stones to find one with the right pitch, and then having them all laid out, and then playing them, like marimbas, as you say, or, like a kind of xylophone. And didn't speak any English, although he spoke fluent English. But he
wouldn't speak to us.
He wouldn't speak anything else.
I remember that. So I can't remember who was with us that day, but they had to translate.
I think it was Yowie. I think it was Hjorley.
Okay. But, I can't imagine.
But I mean, it was like everybody kind of was there, but he was. But he did his translations, and it's kind of like you sort of wonder whether or not they're just sort of doing that there and not really getting out much. You can, but hell, he'd been playing at the Barbican in London.
Aye. Imagine sending all those. Yeah. Sending all those stones across the, I don't know how you get those stones to London, but there we go.
Yeah, I know. He was an amazing guy, though.
Yes.
That was a lovely trip. And
no, it was a good time.
But you have been brought up with stories. I mean, since you were just a piddy lass, you were a kid.
I've been incredibly lucky. It's interesting how all of us that come into storytelling, some of us have been lucky, like yourself, and of being in a community where it was kind of just normal. And even though I didn't, I was growing up in a very different place than yourself, but when I was just a tiny girl, so just a wee bairn, my mum was a university lecturer in Northwestern University in America, but she was a lecturer in theatre, in children's theatre and children's drama, and also in children's literature. But because she'd gotten interested in traditional storytelling from seeing, and I suppose back in that's Northwestern's near Chicago, there's a lot of, so she would have seen a lot of kind of African storytelling and a lot of kind of storytellers from there. But she also had a very close friend who had a lot of connections in Appalachia. So of course those traditional stories there, and Jerry and George were just amazing people. George was an illustrator, but he was also ran the folk music radio program out of the Old Town School of Folk Music in Chicago. So they used to have caleighs because George was a piper, and their surname was Armstrong. So quite strong connections with Scotland. And they were both guitar players and singers. Their daughters played the fiddle and bagpipes and all sorts. So they would have caleighs all the time at the house, which of course, I mean, imagine being in the middle of America and people that understand the concept of a cailleigh. And so from really, really tiny, I was in situations where it was expected that everyone contribute to the evening's entertainment. And I don't sing. I hadn't started any musical instruments at that time. And so I was telling stories. Because my mum was using, and she was using that. It's interesting to see, I have memories of my nursery school of her bringing her students in and getting them to use like Aesop fables, like the Lion and the Mouse, and getting the children to act it out, to reenact it and to work with the story. So it was doing it that kind of way. So it still had connections with sort of theatre games and that kind of thing, but it was still working with stories in a much more free way. There was no, instead of the, scripts or any of that kind of thing. It was really kind of reacting to the children's reactions and getting the students to understand how that worked. So I was really lucky. And one of my mum's favorite stories is that when she was getting fed up with these university students, so they were straight out of university and out of high school, and they mumbled. They didn't have, they were very kind of, and so she was trying to get them to understand about they had to project and they had to be clear when they were telling stories. And I was 3 at the time, and I had a very, how some bairns have a very clear, at that age, they can be very, very exact with their enunciation. It might get terrible by the time they're a teenager, but I was very much that way. So she put me up on a table, on a chair, and got me to tell them the 3 little bears at the lecture. And so I started this, and I was very serious about this. It's a very important story. And I started putting voices to the bears. So when Mama Bear shouts for up the stairs for Papa Bear, come to breakfast, porridge is ready. Do I have to? I said, as Papa Bear, because of course. Do I have to get up? They all started laughing. I don't know why, but they all started laughing. And I was offended. I thought this was terrible. So I got up, turned the chair around, sat down, my back to them, and I continued to tell the story right the way to the end with all the voices. So that was I think that was my storytelling debut.
No.
Which is quite but yeah, no, it's I have been very lucky. It's been part of my life since can't imagine not listening to stories or telling stories.
Well, I always kind of associate you with a bit of a legend of the Scottish storytelling world with Stanley Robertson.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Well, your mother collected stories from Stanley, did you not?
Yes, because of course, and that again, what an incredible childhood to have. It seemed a bit strange. I sometimes would say to my mum, why can't you be normal? Why can't you be a normal mother like other mothers? But she decided to do her PhD in Scottish stories, sort of folk narrative, as it's called, at the School of Scottish Studies in Edinburgh. And she started that PhD when I was 7. And she was very quickly sort of introduced to people like Duncan Williamson and Betsy White to begin with, and folk like that. And in fact, I've got photographs from that because, again, my mum just, she loved that kind of gathering of people together. So I have photographs even from that first year when we were in Edinburgh of people like the Stewarts, Bill and Sheila and Kathy Stewart sitting in our sitting room, and Adam McNaughton and all these, and folk from the school. The school was quite an exciting place then because you had Hamish Henderson and retired, but he was still in the school. And there were people like David Clement, who was Morag MacLeod, incredible Gaelic singer. And so there was just lots of characters. And my mum would get them to the house, and we would have a caleighs. And but yes, so she'd take me with her sometimes when I was still in primary school. And I think after a while, because you see, when she started working on what her PhD was going to be, by that point she had met Stanley Robertson in Aberdeen. And no one had really, some people had recorded Stanley a wee bit before that. He was the nephew of Jeannie Robertson, one of the most incredible ballad singers. And so some people had recorded him, but I think it was mostly for maybe songs and a wee bit of storytelling. But he hadn't, Duncan was much more known, Duncan Williamson. But he had, obviously, his wife, Linda Williamson, had done a PhD on him. And there was, so, but then, as time went on and my mum was recording Stanley, so we'd sometimes get on the train up to Montrose to visit Betsy White and Brycey, her husband, and then we would continue on to Aberdeen to see Stanley. And just, I was very lucky to be able to sit in on some of those recordings and listen to some of the stories. Amazing.
Must have been absolutely magical, because should maybe explain for anybody that's not kind of in the storytelling world that these people are all kind of legends of traveller storytellers.
Mm-hmm.
So they're Scottish travellers, and an incredible wealth of tales and songs, which had been passed down through the generations.
Yeah.
It's
just incredible. And what was really good from my start, I'm again, I feel lucky about this, is that because I was a child, I didn't understand the sort of stigma that is often, or at least especially in the past, but still exists, the stigma against the traveling people, that this idea of people not accepting them because they didn't understand their culture and their way of life. But for me, these were just amazing people that really, because they've got such a love of children, they have such a good way with young people, because they treat you with respect and with, at your level. And so to me, these were just incredible people that just would sing me songs and tell me stories. I mean, I had no idea what a traveller was. It didn't matter. I didn't care. These were just lovely folk.
Yeah, I mean, we did, because we had ones, would come by the firm,
Aye.
usually selling clays, so they'd have a big bundle on their back. There was one old lady in particular that used to come by, and I don't know why she thought that this was in some ways a good idea, but she would leave her car at the end of the road and then walk in with this pack on her back to give the impression that that she'd been walking for miles and miles with this pack on her back, which is just basically a blanket with clothes inside it that she was selling, all wrapped up, and she'd get that over the shoulder. And we all knew she had a little kind of mini van. That was a red one that was parked at the end of the road,
Oh, that's brilliant. I like that.
Yeah. But the thing is, me mother, who was for Westray, I mean, she was always welcomed in and given something to eat, and if it was a time that we were sitting doing a bite of dinner ourselves, because the main meal was in the middle of the day in the farming community in Orkney in those days. And she would, get a plate of soup and all that as well. So it was just a part of life, But yeah, there was a lot of really what you could call racism, intolerance towards travellers.
Aye. And you can, it's one of those things that you can see that's always going to happen, because people don't understand why they wanted to live that life. They didn't make any sense. And it's also, unfortunately, that, people within communities will look at, they always, some people look for folk that they can put down and that they can, and this is something that happens in, whether it's somebody that has a different, comes from a different place, or has, doesn't look like you or speak like you. there's going to be issues.
Sadly, it's still very much the case,
Yeah.
I'm not immune for it myself. I have a prejudice against billionaires. Only the ones that don't pay their bloody taxes and then moan about other people,
Aye, well, yeah.
I haven't contributed a penny towards society. Yeah.
I know. And there's, yeah.
Rhonda will be staring at me and they're going, don't swear. Have a right old rant. But I mean, the travellers really, kept that cultural heritage alive.
Yeah.
A lot of the stories that they would have heard would have come through local folk as well. They would have picked up stories as they went.
Aye. Yeah,
but
and you can see the connection with like Ireland, and because there would have been a lot of travellers, going across and intermarriages and things, and so that's when we've got lots of connections within folklore and within our traditions and stories in Scotland that connect to Ireland and interlink. But I think the travellers were also part of that in terms of how that those connections, as well as obviously for yourselves, of course, it's often Scandinavia, that strong link. But I love that connection in Scotland where you can see the sort of Viking traditions and the sort of those kind of influences that come from both the East and the West, from all these peoples that came and connected. And also from, we had obviously the Welsh, and there's other Celtic countries that have similar traditions. And it's fascinating, all of that.
Yeah, it's wonderful, but I do want to stress that the travellers were not just picking up stories for locals.
Oh, no.
They had a huge collection of stories themselves.
Yeah, and that's the thing about, because my mum's PhD ended up being sort of based on the Jack tales of Stanley, because the travellers they have unusual versions of things. They have a very unique way of these stories that are just have so many layers and messages and kind of they're incredible stories, and quite a lot of these stories don't get told because they're really long. And there's often a lot of the travellers, Jack tales and other stories have a lot of riddles in them, which I love. I love the fact that there's riddles. But they are very unique at times. You can see the connection with stories that we know in other parts of Scotland or other parts of Europe, but they've got a difference, don't they? They've got a kind of their own unique kind of little spice. And
yeah, they've definitely got their own flavour.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I've been really, really lucky, mostly thanks to Bob Pegg, actually, who had his Tales in Martinmas storytelling festival in November, in early November in the Highlands.
Actually.
And so, I mean, I've shared a stage with Stanley on quite a few occasions. With Sheila Stewart, Stewart, Jeff Smith, and of course Duncan, who I never actually only tell stories with Duncan in private, like in a personal setting, not on a stage. But we have shared a few tales as well. And I mean, a real fabulous storyteller as well was Alec John Williamson, who nobody kind of hears about because he lived in the Highlands.
I know, he was amazing.
So he wouldn't go to Edinburgh and do the big festival there because he had to be home in the evening to care for his wife, which huge respect to him for that. But he had a fabulous voice as well. Alec John. I'm like a choir boy.
Oh, I never got to meet him. I've just heard, no, I've seen like him on kind of there's been some video material that I've caught, and I've also heard him, recordings, but I never got to meet him. I would have loved to.
Lovely guy, really lovely guy. I think he was a cousin or Duncan's.
Aye.
But he, like I said, he wanted to be home in the evening
Fair
to
enough.
be there for his wife, and so huge respect to him for that.
Yeah. There was also... Sorry
he could
to
have been
interrupt,
quite
Tom.
something, you know, if he'd been picked up on in Edinburgh, you know, but he was happy, and he was fabulous, great storyteller.
Did you ever get to meet Willie McPhee?
No, I didn't, which is a great regret, because
you would have liked
again,
him.
a bit of a legend, you know.
Mm-hmm. You would have gotten on grand with Willie. It was a really... I mean, a lot of these people, were kind of like almost grandparent figures to me, or, some of these folk like Willie and McPhee. And so I knew them as a child, which is, again, one of those things which is silly, because I shouldn't regret, because I didn't know them, but I would love to have known them as an adult, so that we could, have a different kind of conversation and a different kind of relationship. But, hey, I shouldn't complain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, but you spent quite a bit of time with Stanley, though.
Aye. Yeah.
So what was your kind of first impression of Stanley? Was there a curiosity,
Well, he was a tall man, thin, tall man, and he there was a sort of magnetism to, he was easily the center of attention in a room. As a child, you kind of felt yourself drawn to him. And he had because, oh gosh, I can't remember how many children they have, but they only have 2 daughters, and their youngest, Nicole, was just a wee bit younger than me. So I would just kind of gather with the children and beside Nicole because she must be 2 years, because Mum has a recording of Nicole telling the story of wee Appley and wee Orangey. That wonderful, gruesome story when she's 5, telling it in a mixture of Doric and Cant and a 5-year-old's language, which is very hard to quite understand unless you know the story. You can work it out. But she was so, and Stanley, what was amazing about it was his eyes. He had the most incredible eyes, especially when he was telling the scary stories. Oh my goodness. It was absolutely terrifying. I mean, he had this face and eyes that were so mobile and just drew you into these stories. What incredible master of storytelling.
Yeah. Our friend Sheila Fechney described him as cadaverous, because he was just very tall, very thin, very white.
Yeah. Oh, and he also always had a can of Coke beside. I think Diet Coke. Diet Coke.
Gallons of the stuff. Yeah. It's kind of funny, because he had converted to being a Mormon, and he wouldn't drink tea or coffee because it had caffeine in it, but he drank gallons of Diet Coke every day, without realizing that basically it's like the ingredients is water, caffeine, flavorings.
Well, no, whatever the replacement sugar is. Yeah,
but
no, not with Stanley.
I shared a room with him once in Shetland, and he'd get up in the morning and he would, say, "What like today, Stanley?" No so good, boy, no so good. He says, me back's off his hair, and me head's off his hair, and me legs are off his hair, and he would list all the body parts that were sore. And loon, he would say, loon, that's hard. And then he would get up in front of a crowd, and that man just transformed into something else. I mean, you'd be hard pushed to find anybody that could dominate a room.
I agree.
Stanley, without being forceful or anything like that.
No.
He just had that aura, that charisma, and he started to tell a story, and he had you in the palm of his hand. And I've seen them with bairns as well, sitting around them, in schools, just staring up, wide-eyed and just completely caught up in the story.
Because Lawrence went to the Smithsonian Festival with him, didn't he? And I remember Lawrence telling us about Stanley, in some sort of tent, because it was summertime, so they were out and there was hundreds, because those types of storytelling events in the US are huge, and here's Stanley with his Doric Aberdonian kind of language, as well as his traveller account and what have you, and he was still able to absolutely capture that audience. They were with him the whole way, and it's just like, that is a skill.
Yeah. There was only one occasion when things didn't go terribly well in Washington, was Lawrence was passing by and he could hear Stanley's voice, and he looked in, and there was a group of kids that had been sent there who were obviously not interested in hearing the story, and they'd really made their minds up they weren't interested before they went anywhere near the place. So they were on their mobiles, and some were, sitting talking to other ones with their back to Stanley, and Stanley was telling the story, and then Lawrence thought, well, I'll just slip away quietly before he spots me, and he says later on, "Well, Stanley, and what did you get on the day?" "Ah, nae so good," he says. "They gave me awful scabby wains." He said, "they had to gulder at them."
Oh, that's brilliant.
To gulder is to stare. So,
yeah.
Aye. Normally, like I said, anybody that was, he had you spellbound,
Yeah, so my mum's got some photographs, because she ended up doing her PhD thesis was a comparative study of Jack Tales from Appalachia, and there was her main storyteller there was a man called Ray Hicks, who's also a very tall, thin man. In fact, taller than Stanley. He was near enough. I think when he was young, he was near enough 7 foot tall. I mean, it was a huge man with a tiny wee wife, Rosa, lovely woman, and Ray lives in the deep in the Appalachian Mountains, and so she recorded Jack Tales, and it was a sort of comparative study of what has sort of happened to those Jack Tales when they went from two communities that were very isolated, which was also kind of an interesting contrast, because you had these people living in the depths of these mountains down what they call hollers, which are like our glens, but they sort of end in dead ends, deep into and people go out shooting squirrels and rattlesnakes and all that kind of stuff, and they live very much hand to mouth. And of course the traveller community, which was very much isolated because of prejudice, and that those two communities that really treasured their traditional arts, their stories, their crafts, their songs. And but I've got photographs of Stanley in the middle of the Appalachian Mountains with his bagpipes, with all these Appalachian folk with their dulcimers and banjos and fiddles surrounding him, and he got on brilliantly with them. It was a grand, really good, and they just thought he was incredible too. They were just amazing.
Did you fancy telling us a wee story? Would you be up for that?
Yeah.
Hello, friends. Just a reminder of how you can support our heritage work and help it to continue. Subscribing, comments, and positive reviews from wherever you listen will help other listeners to find us too. And sharing the podcast on social media is always helpful. You might also consider purchasing Orkneyology Press books and products from our Orkneyology.com website, which is also where you can find the show notes for this podcast. All of these are a great help. And if you're able, you might consider buying us an occasional dram. This is from our Ko-fi page, and you can find it at ko-fi.com/Orkneyology. We really appreciate your encouragement in any way you give it, even if it's just sending warm thoughts our way. Thank you so much. Enjoy the podcast.
Well, I mean, would you like one of Stanley's stories?
Well, it would be appropriate, I suppose, but just, yeah.
Yeah, because we're talking
Whatever you
about
fancy.
well, it's kind of hard to think. There's so many that I love. One of the ones that I really like to tell because I don't know, it just always has resonated with me. But it's and I'm often in that part of the world because I've got family up in South Deeside, up in Aberdeenshire. So quite often we're driving across from Lochaber, making our way, which is always difficult going east-west in Scotland, isn't it? It's easier going north-south. But we make our way, and and we come quite close to Blether, and then you could go through Blether and then make a kind of left along to Fingin, where our destination is. But it's a beautiful part of Scotland there, along the Dee. And this was a story that Stanley, I've heard him tell many times, and it's a long time ago that there was a family of travellers that lived there. And a lot of times the travelling families, in the summertime, when they would travel the roads, they would quite often have a base. They'd have a place where that they were, they would come back to, and they'd do a sort of almost like a circular route round all the places, because a lot of the travellers would have their regular stops, be it certain farmers that would expect them to help with the crops or with odd jobs around the place, or different communities that were waiting for them to come by the houses with maybe some things to sell, like things that they made out of tin, like the kettles and pots and pans, or woven baskets, or things like that. Because of course you didn't have shops that you could go to, so there were certain things that you had to get in different ways. And this particular family it was Davy and Mary Stewart, and they had a son who was when the story happened, he was maybe about 13. He was a young lad. But he had grown up in this way. He'd been taught how to go round the houses, selling things, collecting bits of scrap, and this particular summer, it was July, and they had their caravan. Now they had most of the travellers folk in Scotland had a cart, with a horse-drawn cart with a tarp, to pull in over their goods, and they would travel the roads that way. And then where they stopped, they would make the tents with the hazel boughs, and but Davy and Mary Stewart had a wooden caravan, beautiful wooden caravan, and it was decorated, gorgeously decorated, and they called it the Evening Star, and they had that written on the caravan, and anyone in the area that saw that caravan coming would be like, "Oh, there's Davy and Mary Stewart." Now, this particular July, their young lad decided he was going to head off on his own. His parents had other things to be doing, and he headed off on his own across the hills. So the area, I think Braemar wasn't actually a wee town there, but there was a lot of like houses set about the place. So he went from place to place, and it was a lot of walking. So he didn't have a wee van like the woman that you remember from, but he just had his feet. So he was walking through the heather across the hills. Now, we all know July in Scotland, it can be a very, very wet month. And this particular day, it started off quite bonny. And he had travelled further than he'd meant to. And towards the middle of the afternoon, he was then heading back towards Blether when those clouds came across the sky. And before he knew it, the rain was just bucketing down. I mean, it was just pouring out the sky. And I mean, in seconds, he was soaked to the skin. And he was saying, "Oh, this is horrific. I'm going to be," he was already miserable and he had miles to go. So he thought, right, I'll go down. Instead of taking a shortcut across the hills, I'll make my way down to the main road. Maybe somebody will be coming along the road I could get a lift with. So he did, and he was walking along, sort of splashing through the puddles, and when he hears in the distance the sound of wheels on the road, he thought, oh, thank goodness, a cart or something. And he looked back, and there were 4 magnificent black horses drawing a fancy carriage. They could see the coachman, the way the coachman used to dress with the big capes, and he had a lum hat, a big tall hat on his head, top hat, but we call them lum hats in Scotland, like a chimney. And there was this coachman coming along, and I thought, oh no, there's no way he's going to stop for the likes of me. I mean, this was too fancy. So he stepped off the road into the side to let the coach pass. But to his absolute surprise, the coach stopped. And the coachman looked down at him and gave him a smile and said, ah, laddie, where are you off to today? Can I give you a lift? And lass, well, I'm headed to Ballata. And the coach was like, oh, well, I am too, but I've got some stops on the way. So if you don't mind a sort of circular route, you could hop up. Now, this was a fancy coach, as I said, so there was actually a wee roof over the coachman. And the laddie thought, oh, that'd be so great to get a wee bit of shelter. And I mean, you'd be cuddled up beside that great cape of the coachman, and he thought this was great. So he said, oh, thank you so much, and leapt up beside the coachman. Now, there was a wee window, because in those types of coaches, there was a window that you could look into the carriage, so the coachman could check on, that everything was fine inside the carriage. And the laddie took a wee glance inside and saw that there was, 2 or 3 folk in there. It was awfully quiet. You didn't hear anyone chatting to each other, but, on they went. The coachman got the horses going, and away they went down the road. And yeah, they turned off after a while and took this road up to a house. And as they drew up outside the house, the front door opened, and out came a young woman. And the lad was thinking, she's not dressed for the weather. She was in a kind of like a goonie, like almost like a night dressy kind of floaty thing, and no coat. He thought this was awfully odd, but she came out, got into the carriage and sat down and looked through the window. None of the passengers actually greeted her, or no one said anything. Goodness. Ach, well, strange. On they continued, up another path, another road, into another house, and this time an old man came out, and again, he didn't seem to have a coat or even proper shoes on his feet, but he came over, got into the coach, and again, no sound of speech, of greetings from the other passengers. On went the coach. And this happened a couple more times, and then the coachman turned to the lad and said, we're nearly at our last stop, and then we'll be on our way to Ballata. Now, I'm a wee bit early for this next one, so you're going to have to wait a bit, but it won't be long. And they drew up outside this house, and the coachman got off the seat, and into the house he went. And the laddie's just sitting there on the seat. Now, the rain had eased a bit, but all of a sudden, the wind and the rain started even harder than before, and the wind was whipping that rain round the carriage, and the laddie was getting soaked, and he was sitting there and he was shivering with the cold, and he thought, I'm sure nobody will mind if I just jump into the carriage and just get a bit of shelter until the coachman comes out. So he jumped off the seat, went round, opened the door, and he jumped in, and he said, what a day it is, isn't it? Terrible weather, this. There was silence. No one responded to him. In fact, none of the folk in that carriage even looked at him. I thought, oh, these are queer folk. Odd folk, these. And then he started to kind of look at them more closely, and every single person had almost a kind of glazed look across their eyes, and they were just staring straight ahead. Not a word, not an indication that they even had heard him speak to them. I thought, oh, no, I don't like this. These folk are so odd. I'm not staying in here. So he jumped out. The rain was pelting down, and so he noticed the roof of the house had quite a overhang. So he went over to the wall to be right under the overhang of the roof. It was beside the window. And, as you do, he kicked in. And what did he see? But it was a bedroom. There was an old man lying in the bed. A woman, the lad assumed it was the man's wife, was sitting by the bed, and there was a minister. And as he looked in the window, the minister, who'd been reading from the Bible, from the good book, leaned over and touched the old man. And then he closed the book. He said, "Mary, I'm really sorry, but that's John gone." And the old woman started to weep. And the laddie said, "Oh my goodness, that old man's just died." But as he felt that, he saw the door of the room open. And there, standing in the doorway, was the coachman. And the coachman looked across to the bed and he beckoned. And what should happen but that man sat up and then got out of bed and followed the coachman out of the room. And at that instant, that laddie knew who he had been sitting beside all that time. It was the angel of death. Oh, he was just horrified. I mean, he just started to tremble with fear, and he was like, "What am I going to do? What should I do?" But he didn't. He panicked, and he ran back to the coach, and he scrambled up and sat there. The front door of the house opened. Out came the coachman and the old man. The old man went and sat inside the carriage, and the coachman got up. He said, "Oh, laddie, that's us then. We're off to Appalachia." Now, until that point, they had been blethering away like old pals. I mean, we were chatting and telling stories and laughing. But after that, the boy just sat there. He couldn't say a word. He was just so frightened, and he didn't know what to do. But as they got close to Appalachia, now the caravan site where his parents' caravan was across at the other side of Appalachia. But he was so desperate to get off of that coach that as soon as they got just at the outskirts of Appalachia, he said, "This is fine, you can let me off here." And the coachman said, "Are you sure, lad?" And he said, aye, this will be fine. This will be fine. Just here's good. And the coachman said, "Oh, you know something? It's been such a pleasure, such a joy today to have company. It's a rare thing for me to have somebody to blether to. And I've had a great time. I'll be seeing you again one day. But it was good to have your company." The laddie slipped off the coach, thinking to himself, "I hope it's a long time before I see you again." And the coachman took up the reins, and he was about to get the horses moving again, when the laddie, he didn't know why he did this, but he shouted up to the coachman, "Where are you off to next? Where's your next stop?" And as the coach moved off through the clop of the horses' hooves and the rattle of the wheels, he heard the coachman say, "I'm off to the Evening Star." And away went the coach. Oh, the laddie. Oh my God, the Evening Star. That was his parents' caravan. And he started to run like he had never run in his life before. I mean, he was just flying down that road. And as he came into Appalachia, he was taking all the shortcuts he could remember. He was just flying down those roads. But as he came in sight of the caravan site, what did he see but flames, clouds and clouds of smoke and flames shooting up into the sky. And his heart was thumping, the tears were streaming down his face, and he was running. And he came to the crowd that was round, looking at the fire, and he pushed and shoved his way through. And sure enough, there was the caravan, the Evening Star. Just fire and flames, hardly anything left of it. And he stood there panting and sobbing, just in shock. When suddenly he heard his name shouted, and he looked round, and pushing their way through the crowd were his parents. And you can imagine, the joy as they came together and they hugged and they kissed, and the relief that they found each other and that they were okay. But the laddie was just like, but I don't understand. I don't understand. The angel of death, he came to our caravan. Why? And then the lad's father, Davy Stewart, said to him, lad, really sorry to tell you this, but your dog, Prince, was in the caravan when the fire started. So the angel of death must have come for Prince. And that story was told to Stanley's grandfather by that young lad who had experienced that amazing carriage drive with the angel of death.
Oh, that's a fabulous story, that. It's proper creepy.
But that's just a really good example of Stanley's stories, that, they had a lot of supernatural in them. And
yeah. There was also dangers as well, because he had quite a few stories about burkers.
Aye.
People listening will have no idea what a burker is, but we could maybe fill them in.
Well, yeah. The burkers were, that was just, it connects to Burke and Hare and all of that kind of unfortunate time period when doctors needed to teach anatomy. They needed what's the word that they use for a corpse? Cadaver, that's it. Cadaver. And they needed fresh cadavers, not, and that was that, when people would actually have, that's why when you go into graveyards, you'll see that incredible sight of sort of like padlocked graves, so that the workers couldn't get because quite often, like coffins could be dug up, and if there'd been a fresh burial. But travellers, as we've talked about, the way that they were thought of is that they were disposable members of society. So they could easily be basically stolen and murdered, and then presented to a doctor for how many shillings you would get for a cadaver, and then a university student would get the chance to cut you up so that they could learn about the human body. But it's just, the idea of hunting people for money is, ugh.
Well, the thing is, they weren't recorded. There was no birth certificate.
Precisely.
So they couldn't prove that anybody had died or been abducted or murdered, while they were murdered and taken away. And also the police wouldn't care. They're not going to investigate,
No.
So it was, they had lots of stories about the burkers.
Aye.
The black kind of hearse as well, with the sacks tied around the wheels of the cart so that it didn't make a sound.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. Aye.
Of course, ironically, Burke and Hare, they never robbed a grave in their life. They
No.
They're people.
They just murdered them,
Mm-hmm. Surefire way of getting a fresh one. So.
But well, we have a lot of that kind of thing, though, don't we? In our traditional stories, where you get that sort of be it press ganging, So in the Outer Hebrides, and I don't know if assume it probably happened in the Orkney Islands and maybe Shetland, where if you were your son would be at the breakfast, or your father or your husband would be at the breakfast table in the morning, and then they go off to check on, I don't know, the sheep or a field, and they'd get press ganged, they'd be captured and taken away, and you'd never see them again. You'd never know what had happened to them. Which I think is, again, one of the reasons why we have a lot of stories where people disappear into the fairy hills and all of that kind of thing. But it's quite incredible to think of that. I mean, I know people disappear nowadays as well, but that was, there were certain, people thought that folk that lived out in these islands were not as worthy. They weren't worth anything.
Well, the thing is, they knew that they would be able to handle a boat, and that made them more valuable to the Navy. If they were seamen.
That's true. They had skills that a laddie from the town might not have.
I've just written a book called Tales in the Landscape for the Orkney mainland, and I'll do another one with North and South Isles, but there's quite a few press gang stories in there. But the one that's really quite tragic was that there was a man had hidden in the press of the house. The press was the cupboard that had shelves in it for keeping your food in, long before refrigeration was ever a concept. You would keep your press would be where the food was kept, and they had taken shelves out of it. And when the press gang came around, the man hid in the press, and they were searching the house, and his pretty boy, who was just a toddler, was laughing with delight and clapping his hands every time they were looking somewhere where his dad wasn't. And then when they had just given up and were going to go, the wee boy says, "Dad's in the press." And so they went open the door, and sure enough, there he was. So he was led away. But it has a slightly happy ending.
Oh, good.
And that there was one of the men in the press gangs, because the lairds were responsible for supplying so many young men to the Navy or the Army. It was usually the Navy here. And they would then supply names, and then the officers of the press gang would go and chase these guys, try to catch them. But the one guy that was leading this man that had been hiding in the press suit said to his wife, "Sarah, as long as I've got a bannock, you'll have half of it." So he felt guilty about this. But that evening, then the wee boy clapped his hands with delight and says, "Dad's back." And his father came in. And this guy that had said that about the half a bannock thing, he had got some oil of vitriol, as they called it, sulfuric acid, and poured some on the man's legs. And
oh my God.
He was in terrible pain with it, but of course they had to have a medical inspection. As soon as the doctor seen the state of his legs, all red raw and festering, kind of, with the acid, thought he must have some horrible skin disease, which was transmitted to the other guys. So he failed them on medical grounds.
So he was then sent home.
He said that the pain of it was so bad that he would probably rather have the Navy,
Yeah, I mean,
a lot of that.
That's quite a story.
Yeah, there's lots of these ones, kicking around. But with Stanley, I mean, he was in Supernatural. He was also a great one for fortune telling and predicting your futures. Did he ever do anything like that with you?
No, I never experienced that. You have, haven't you? I think. Yes. What was that like?
Well, half what's happened. Possibly it has all happened. I'm not sure. It was at Bob Pegg's one night in Strathpeffer, and we were all hitting the bottle, and so was Stanley. He was hitting the Diet Coke.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was about to say.
Didn't drink
It wouldn't be the whiskey
but no,
for him.
never touched alcohol.
No, he never touched a drop.
The Diet Coke was flowing, and he says to me, he says, "I'll tell you a fortune, laddie," he says. Hold up your hands. So he got me to hold me both hands palm up with the fingers slightly curved, and he touched the tips of my fingers just for a second, not even a second. It was just a moment. He touched me fingers, and he says, "You're going to get a piano." And I went, "What?" And he says, "You're going to get a piano." And I said, "But I can't play the piano, Stanley." And he says, "Well, it doesn't matter. You're getting one anyway."
You get one.
And he says, "And you're getting a bird cage." And I went, "Huh?" He said, "Well, it's something old, like a bird cage." And I went, "So, let me get this right, Stanley. I'm going to get a piano playing budgie, am I?" And he says, "Well, that's what I've seen." Well, I still can't play the piano, but Rhonda does. So we do have a piano.
Oh, that's brilliant. Aye.
And also I got a lantern from an old navigational boy here that was...
That's what it was. Aye.
It was part of the top of a beacon at sea that was used for the lighthouse board. This is a Victorian one, so it's made of brass and copper with windows on it. And it does look a bit like a birdcage. So you could say, well, maybe it was 2 out of 2.
Maybe that's what he saw when he didn't know.
Definitely got the piano.
Okay. No, I think he got the birdcage as well. It's just that it looked. But Stanley, he had that ability to see things. And there was I remember once. I mean, it was an interesting thing, and this is something that is fascinating about the idea because that sort of mixture in Scotland of how the old church, the original when Christianity first came here, and how it got interwoven into the beliefs of the older, the ancient ways. And, when you look at translations, because I don't have the Gaelic, but if I look at sort of those Gaelic psalms and, things like for smothering the fire, for protecting the fire at night, the things that you would say, the prayers that you would say over the fire, they always have this amazing weaving of Christian symbolism and the pagan, the old Celtic gods. Sort of, so there's this kind of weaving together that happens in the stories and things. So it's that thing of somebody like Stanley who is an incredibly spiritual man. I remember him sitting in our kitchen in Silverburn where I grew up, just outside of Edinburgh, and he and Mum would be talking about discussing the Bible. And they both had my mum had come from a Scottish Presbyterian kind of background. She'd gone to Bible class every Wednesday, very, very unlike my upbringing. But she had a lot of knowledge, and Stanley was incredibly knowledgeable. He knew the Bible inside and out.
Oh, yeah.
And he was very, that's why he joined the Mormon church, because it was the only church that he could find that would allow him, which seems incredible, that would allow him to keep his superstition, his belief system, his traveler beliefs, and would accept him as he was, because he had carried both of these. He believed in the supernatural. He believed in all of these kind of ways of ancient ways of Scotland at the same time as he believed in all the sort of Christian doctrine. And so it sort of wove together with him. And when he stayed one time at our house, he got up in the morning and he told my mum that in the night he had seen the woman that used to own our house. And that she was kind of like quizzing him who he was. And was Barbara charging him for the bed for the night. And he was like, no, I'm a guest here. And, so he had a conversation with, in this case, the woman was alive, but somehow he was communing with her spirit. And then another time he went across the road into a house. There's a house across from where we lived, a farmhouse that's had a very troubled history. There's been a lot of and Stanley didn't know that, but he didn't stay in the house for long. He came back and he said to my mum, I'm never going in. I never want to set foot in that house again. It's the house full of evil. There's a lot of evil in that house. And he had that ability to sense different energies. Very complicated, complex person.
We had a few of those in Shetland. When we were sharing a room together, I got up one morning and he said, there's an aura around you, Loon. And I went, oh. And he says, there's a woman who is with you. I think her name's Elizabeth. Does that ring any bells? And I went, well, that would be me mother. So...
Oh, that's amazing.
I found it a bit disturbing, actually.
Well, his bairns, Stanley's children and grandchildren. One time when my mum was back over visiting, we went up to see, and we went to visit Tony, which is one of Stanley's sons, in Aberdeen, and they gathered some of the family. So Nicole was there, and I think that was and then a lot of grandchildren, great grandchildren, and they were talking about the fact that that they feel like their dad is still haunting them. He appears at certain, and in a good way, not in a, but yeah, that, and every year I think that their car radios on the anniversary of his funeral go crazy. If you've got the radio on, it suddenly go absolutely bizarre, like strange noises and things. And but they know he's just playing jokes on them, so to them it's joke, that he's just teasing them and sort of like letting them know he's still about and is watching over them. But who knows, eh?
We'd spent about a time as well at Lawrence Tulloch's house at in Yell. It was the old post office. It's just right up here where the boat sails to Unst.
Yeah, that's right.
And we were in there, and he said, "Was there a fire in this house, or was it bombed during the war?" And Lawrence said, "Well, it was strafed by a Luftwaffe plane. There was bullet holes still in the walls,
Wow.
And he said, I could feel that there was something that was like an attack, a bad kind of thing." And he said, "Was there a nurse that used to live in here?" And he said, "Well, I'm not sure about that, because a lot of people lived in it." And he says, "I'm getting a nurse, and I think she left something in the attic." No, I never heard whether or not anything was found in the attic. I think the implication was it was something written.
Right.
But Lawrence was driving him up there to Yale, and he looked up the hill at Windhouse, which was the Laird's house. And it has the reputation of being the most haunted house in Shetland. And it has an evil reputation. And Stanley looked at it and he goes, "That's an evil place. That there's evil spirits up there," he says. And he'd never seen it before, never heard of the stories.
Right.
But there was supposed to be an entity that used to come there at Yule time, Orkney, which was dangerous. But the lairds there were psychos, and there was stories about guys that had been there and playing cards, and then one of them never left, gone in and buried out in the garden. When they were doing the place up, they opened one of the shutters, wooden shutters that had been nailed shut over the window, over the side of the window,
Uh-huh.
And they opened that, and there was the bones of a baby skeleton in there.
Oh, my goodness.
And there was one other story about the laird that was in there was an evil, sadistic bastard. And there was a fella that was known as being a fabulous fiddle player. His wife died. And at the funeral, the laird came over to him and he says, I want you to come up to me house tonight. I want to speak to you. Bring your fiddle with you. And he said, I can't come tonight. I can't bring a fiddle. He said, me wife's I've just buried my wife, I don't care. He says, I don't care about that. He says, you owe me money. You're behind with your rent. So come up tonight with your fiddle and we'll discuss it, he says. And if you don't, you're out. I'm a victim. That's it. So the man went up that night with his fiddle, and the laird was sitting there with a big glass of brandy. And he had a ledger book open, and it noted the debt that was the arrears or rent that was owed. And he said, right, you owe me this amount of money. Do you have it? No, because he didn't have that. He says, right, well, I'll tell you what. Play for me. Play something on the fiddle. And he said, my wife's just died. I mean, it's a funeral today. I mean, you can't ask me to play the fiddle. And he went, yeah, you'll play the fiddle or you're out. So he had to play the fiddle. And then he said, right, no, a chig. I want something lively. So he started to play a chig.
As a stress base of a jig, but hey.
Wonderful.
It could be a jig.
We will get on to class acts, yeah. So he played the chig. Well, then he said, right, no, dance. And he said, what? And he says, dance while you're playing the chig. And he said, but my wife's just died, I can't do that. It's horrible. And he said, look, I don't care. Couldn't give a shit about your wife dying. You owe me money. You play a chig and dance now or you're out.
Oh, that's it, yeah.
So he starts to play the chig and he starts to do a wee dance along with it. And the enormity of what he was doing, was so great that the tears start flowing down the man's cheeks. And the laird started to roar and laugh as the guy was greeting and dancing and playing the chig. And afterwards he said, that's the funniest thing I've seen in my life. And he took a pen and he put a line through the ledger where the arrears of rent was. And he said, right, that's us quits. So off you go.
Oh, well, definitely a sadistic thing to do. I mean, what a thing to put a man through. I mean,
presumably it's a true story because, I mean, it's still being told in Shetland as a true story.
Well,
it's not been forgotten.
I actually sadly think probably that definitely could be a true story. But, that was something about, Stanley told a lot of stories about, lairds of the Black Airts, one of the classic ones. And, when you were saying about that house, about how it just emanated, you could feel the evil. And so, again, Stanley had, like yourself, actually, you've got this incredible voice that just kind of, just through the way that you use your voice, you creates pictures and just but Stanley, not only I was talking about his eyes and his facial expressions, but his voice could he had that ability to just give you chills, like literally. And like the description of some of these places where the laird of the Black Gairts lived, the great house with where everything, the feel of evil as you approached it and all of that. And it's just, And so I must admit, I just adore supernatural stories and gruesome ones. The most gruesome, the better. Which is well, there we go. That's just. I do like happy stories as well. I do.
Mhm.
I do. I like the cheery ones also. The funny
Mhm.
ones. But I do love those ones where there's just kind of those battles between good and evil, and the kind of they're just incredible stories.
Mm.
Oh,
No, he was quite a man. I mean, he had quite a few books as well. I mean, I've
aye,
got them all
aye.
sitting on the
There's
bookshelf over there. But
aye. Maybe not as much as many as yourself, but or maybe as many.
I've no
Oh,
idea.
sure.
I mean, I've never counted, but his ones are just they're fabulous and some
Aye.
great stories in that.
And the thing is that's really good is that even if you've not been fortunate like ourselves to know some of these people and have their voices, because I think it is that when we talk about storytelling, a lot of times if I'm telling a story of Stanley's, I'm seeing Stanley, I'm hearing him in my head, or Betsy White, or Lawrence. I tell some of Lawrence's stories, and it's a way also of reconnecting. It's a way of keeping their names alive as well,
Yeah.
because even if the audience is not going to know who that person is, I want them to know and understand that these stories get passed from one person to another, and those people's the name, these folk are remembered, and also it's a connection. To me, that's how I keep those memories, is through those stories. I remember when I heard that person tell that story, and I can hear their voice. I can feel them there in the room. And I'm grateful to what all of these people have passed on. And I want to keep their memories and their stories alive. And it's incredible. But luckily, we do have things like the Kista Riches or Toborondocus, the archive through the School of Scottish Studies and the Celtic Department, that you can go and listen. So you can hear Stanley's voice. You can go on to a website and at least hear his voice, even if you didn't know him, and get a sense of who that man was. And I think, thank goodness, we do have access to resources like that nowadays.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a storyteller recently was asking me about telling somebody else's story, and I said, well, look, what I do is I always acknowledge what the story came from. If it's normally I stick to Orkney stories. That's what I am. I'm Orcadian. Orkney stories, right? If you invite me to go somewhere, I'm not going to say this is a Native American story that I read.
No.
It's not my culture. So, but you acknowledge where that story came from, and it's a way of honouring the storytellers of the past.
Yeah, totally.
And just acknowledging as well the fact that this is where he came from, and I think that's very important.
Oh, so it's so important, and we have to, we're an amazing community of people. The storytellers. There's such a variety of styles and ways of approaching it, and that's important to keep that. But it's we can't forget where these things came from. The sort of no, it's really important that.
There was one story that I had Stanley tell, which was a Jack and the Princess story, and I always tell that at schools if I get a chance to. I tell them what I had at Faye, of course. As I said, acknowledging where it came from. But it's a brilliant one for teaching kids because it's like the one thing leads to another.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about
it. Farm, gets a sixpence, loses it. Mother says, put it in your pocket. Gets a chug of milk, pours it in his pocket,
Oh, that one. Yeah. No,
yeah.
I tell that one, but I tell it as Jack and the Laird's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I do it as. But yes, I love that. I always use it, but I tend to, and I don't. How many do you? I tend to sort of stop by the fourth one. I don't do all 7. Because
I do
do you do all 7?
all of
Use
them,
all
yeah.
7 things, right? Okay. I think I chicken out in terms of keeping their attention, but I just love that because the
Well,
kids do get involved, and
the one thing leads to the other, so it's kind of they're all part of the story.
aye.
So that's
But yeah, no, that's one of my go-to ones for bairns for certain primary age, because it works really well.
Yeah, and you can do the voices.
You can have so much fun with it, especially with the butter dripping down the head and down the. And I usually have it going all the way down into his pants. And all the children are like, ah!
I don't go that far, but
I do.
like running in his lugs and doing the back of his neck and dripping off his nose, and they're like,
oh, that's great. I must like going in the lugs as well.
They all think that's horrible,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you've got to horrify them. You've got to make them. But it's such a fun one, and the whole pouring the milk into the pockets. I love that. Dripping down the legs.
It's I have a recording of it on Tales for Troubled Times, I think. So if anybody's curious, go and have a look there. But I always say to the kids, right, a story now, because what was the first thing? If you remember the first thing he got paid, you'll remember all the other ones.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Together, So that's
yeah. It's such a good thing to get a chance to work with kids in schools. I haven't done a storytelling session in schools for a long time. I did I had an amazing opportunity to do one of the People Parish projects, which out of from the, we had that project going out of the Storytelling Centre, tracks, and it was with local to here where I am now in Kinlochleven. There's a wee primary school just down the loch, at the bottom of the loch there, called North Ballachulish, called St. Bride's Primary. It's just one of those two-room schoolhouses. Let's see if I can spit that out. And I was working with the older class, and it wasn't actually. I was telling them lots of stories. It wasn't so. I wasn't using, because, as you know, if I'm generally when I'm doing, especially in schools and things, and generally I'm known for using my harp. With my storytelling. But in this case, I didn't use my harp at all. We didn't have anything to do with music. It was more about just stories, the local stories, and also looking at, because I'm not a Gaelic speaker, but yet here I'm living in this, part of the world that was all Gaelic speakers originally, and the children don't have the Gaelic in that school. So we were looking at the word, the different names of not only the villages, but also different place names, on the, or different burns, or, the loch itself, what did these words mean? And I just love that. Place names, looking at place, and I know that some of them have been corrupted, they've been anglicised, both the Gaelic, the Scots, the Arcadian, and the ones. I'm sure there's, I don't know how much that happened in Orkney and Shetland, but obviously in the mainland there was a lot of times where names were anglicised because folk from the south didn't know what those words meant, and but and the same with the Gaelic, that there was, things, spellings changed and all that kind of thing. But there's enough of it there that you can kind of get a sense. And it's just wonderful for the children to kind of understand their, and I wanted to know this. I felt it was important to know what these words actually mean, because they tell you what was visible on the landscape. There's a house down the road that it turns out it means the place of the hazel trees, and things like that just give you a different view of what folk, when they first came here and were giving names to their houses or the land, were seeing. And so that was fun. So we had a great time making a map. telling the stories.
Yeah. We fell foul here of map makers.
Aye.
Hang on a sec. I was through the law.
Yeah.
And map makers would correct spellings, but without realizing that they were dealing with a different language.
Aye.
Because you got a place like Kirkwall. It was Kirkwall, which means Church Bay.
Right.
Wa, well, that obviously means wall, because it's Scots for wall, a wa. So it got an extra couple of L's shoved on the end of it.
Yeah.
And the same with Peerwall as well in Westray and Was in Hoy. It became Walls, Wide Wall Bay and all that. It's, they were correcting things which weren't wrong in the first place, but.
Yeah. Precisely. Yeah. I can't remember where I read this. It was on some article, but it stuck in my mind because it's such a great example of there was a field somewhere in Scotland that was called Puddock Haw. And the English surveyors didn't know, or they could have been Scots that didn't have the Scots, they could have been, I don't know if they were English or Scottish, but they didn't understand Scots. And so they had no idea what a puddock was, which, if you know your Scots, it's a frog. And a haw, it can be a marsh or a bog, which makes perfect sense. It's a marshy area with frogs. But they called it Paddock Hall because that was the nearest that they could. So it's the same thing, they guess at what seems the nearest to their understanding. They get it completely wrong.
We had a few hall names here as well, which were ironic. So there was a cockle ha and a sparrow ha. So it's like, because there was a cockle beach down below it. Sparrow Hall, obviously, but it's Sparrow Hall. And it was an ironic name because it was a tiny little insignificant building. Rather, and my apologies to anybody that lives in Cockleha and thinking, how dare you? Originally, it was just a small building, and so it was ironic. They were calling it a hall, like a mansion when it was anything but. Yeah. So, how did you get into storytelling? I mean, obviously, you're immersed in it your whole life, but what made you kind of go, I'm going to do this?
Well, I suppose it was partly because I started playing the Scottish harp, the clarsach, when I was about 12 because my father started making them, and then it became his profession. He had been a joiner, and he was wanting to do something more creative, and he decided, it'd be interesting. There's not a lot of harp makers. There still aren't a lot of harp makers in this country. And it's an instrument that obviously dates back. It goes back into the Picts time. And, it has a very long history in Scotland. So I started playing that and I actually got a music degree, but I'm more, most of my harp career has been teaching. And I've never really wanted to be, I wasn't interested in being soloist because I find that quite, very strangely, I find that very terrifying. I can get up in front of whoever and tell a story and I'm absolutely fine. But if I was to do like just solo harp, I would be absolutely, I just found that excruciating, just in terms of nerves, and I just wasn't my sort of what I wanted to do, and I never really got involved in bands, and I don't sing, and of course the storytelling, I had stopped doing much storytelling as a teenager. As one, seemed embarrassing and kind of. But I think it was just the fact that there were more storytellers. My mum was one of the people that was part of, with Donald Smith, gathered together to get the storytelling, International Storytelling Festival started. And then that led to the Storytelling Forum, and then the Netherbow eventually becoming the Scottish Storytelling Centre. So there was there were people about that, and there were more and more folk that were getting interested in storytelling. And so it just kind of seemed like, well, the harp is a perfect instrument for combining the spoken word. Because first of all, it's not an instrument that's, it has, okay, it can be loud, but not that loud. It's very hard to be, you can hardly sort of get to the level of a trumpet or or something like that. But you can be also very, very quiet and delicate, as you can be underneath a voice, and you can rise and fall with a voice, or it's got quite a large range. Not as much as piano or a classical pedal harp, but it still has, it goes from the C that is 2 octaves below middle C up to a very high A that's 3 octaves above middle C. So it's kind of, so you've got this kind of range of sounds. And the harp is it's an instrument that can make lots of kind of strange sounds and effects. It's like a guitar. You can create patterns, like little chordal patterns. So, there's a lot of things you can do with it, and you can use it to accompany the voice. And when people ask you, because I quite often talk and play at the same time, and folk ask me about how do you do that? But background music jobs over the years, you're sitting there playing background music, and one of the guests come up, and inevitably in the middle of your favorite song, and they start asking questions. And it's one of those very difficult situations, because it's like, do I stop playing and talk to this person, which is only polite, but I'm being paid to play. So I used to try and do that thing of playing and talking to them at the same time. And I don't know how successful I was in the past, but it's something that obviously I've developed over time. I remember the first story I put together with music, which is the ballad story of the blind harper of Loch Maben. And I tried to do this thing so an overlap, and it's at the dance where the harper's playing. And unfortunately, the first time I didn't realize how difficult it would be to talk over a strathspey, which is one of these kind of very jaggy tunes. It's very rhythmic. And I found myself talking like following the music, and, your voice going up and down. So it's like learning how to keep, the two, so that you've got these, you're still using your voice as a storyteller, but your hands are playing a different rhythm and a different thing. And it's just been fun to do that over the years. And so I think, and actually it was also back then, there are certain things now that we have, but there was bursaries that were available for emerging storytellers. And I got a bursary. Now, I have so much to thank Donald Smith for, because at that time, he was this sort of high hegan, the chief of the clan of storytellers at the Storytelling Centre, and he suggested that I go to Shetland. So I went up a couple of times. The first visit was to George Peterson up, I can't remember which part, it's northwest part of the mainland, or was he up on one of the islands?
He was from Papastour originally.
Aye, that's right. So I went to visit him.
Peterson, and they always said the PS was for Papastour. So
I went to visit him, but of course, I was really shy, and I didn't have any kind of experience in interviewing folk, like, we were, and so, but it was lovely to meet him, and so I didn't really, that was just a kind of visit and having a chat, and then I went up to meet these people called the Tullochs. Lawrence and Margaret Tulloch on Yell, and I stayed with them for a week, and oh my goodness, what an experience! What a wonderful man Lawrence was, as you well know, and Margaret. I mean, they just kind of embraced me, brought me adopted me basically into the household, and I, remember Lawrence took me all over the place, and and one day we had an adventure. We had a picnic up on Unst. We went across the ferry with Liz came along as well, their daughter, and the four of us went across and had a picnic on the beach, which meant basically being completely wrapped up and trying to eat your sandwiches without them being blown away by the wind. And and he took me around and told me stories of because he'd been a lighthouse keeper on the the lighthouse there on Unst. So he wanted me to see it. And so that was an incredible experience. But I was so lucky because that was one strand of the bursary. The other was to shadow David Campbell and Ewan McVicker.
Right.
So so I actually just followed them around for some of their sessions, which is really wonderful because you get a chance if you're lucky, you might be able to see some of your colleagues performing, which I absolutely love. Getting a chance to listen to stories. I will be there. I want to listen to any stories, and to get a chance to hear other storytellers is such a treat. But we don't often get a chance to see each other working, say with children in schools or with other kinds of situations. And so that was a really important experience, to get a chance to be with these different storytellers. And, so that's that type of thing was really how it all kind of started, I suppose, in terms of thinking of it as, I suppose professionally.
I'd completely forgotten. Of course, you went up and stayed with Lawrence. I knew that, but I'd forgotten it. So
yeah,
it's lovely to hear all that again. It's so special. Would you be up for giving us a wee tune, or would that be much like being put in the spotlight again?
Oh, no. I don't mind now. It's funny thing, actually, the storytelling has been a wonderful thing for my harp playing because I use it, and it's a sort of safety because if I feel at all nervous and I'm not happy with what I'm at that moment playing, I can go straight back into the story. And one of the other joys of having an instrument like this is I absolutely love accompanying not other storytellers. And lots of folk and lots of our colleagues know this. And it's really brilliant because you're about to get on stage or you just start a session and somebody will be like, oh, Heather, I'm telling a story that would really suit some music in it. You'll know where it is. Or they might tell me just like a brief thing, say, oh, well, there's a bit where there's a lullaby, or they'll give me a 2-second sort of a synopsis of the story, and then it's like, right, let's just give it a go, and there you are. And I adore that because it's that thing of I'm there, trying to create, give it atmosphere and give that kind of extra little lift to a story and a bit of drama or what have you. But I'm having to listen to that story, the storyteller, with such kind of a different kind of listening. It's really intense trying to sort of follow their voice and to follow the dynamics of their voice. And it's really interesting. I was doing something in Poland once with some storytellers, and one of the Polish storytellers had asked me to accompany her story, but she was going to be telling it in Polish. And I don't speak a word of Polish, but she told me what the story was. And that whole thing, she was such a good storyteller. I could follow her body language. I could follow her voice. I could follow how she was telling the story. And because at least I knew the outline of the story, I could then add the music. And that's something so fun about that. It's just, just joyful and getting to play. I hadn't really, I'm going to play, we were talking about, telling stories that we've gotten from other people and passing those on and connecting and making sure people know this about. And I think the thing is that the Scottish harp it had a bit of a broken tradition. And in some ways, so did storytelling, because there was, except for in the traveller communities and some other sort of in places like, more rural places, the islands, Orkney, Shetland and places, but a lot of modern life kind of, and television and books and radio and all of that caused this break from the oral tradition. And the harp, mainly after Culloden time, it's sort of because of the land clearances and many things, political and also cultural, it was an instrument that disappeared to a certain extent, and then it sort of was revived. So I find that, again, fascinating that I'm involved in two rich traditions that have had this kind of break and have to be reintroduced to people, because folk do still, it's getting better, but people still find, when you say, I'm a storyteller, they think you read stories to nursery children or something daft like that. And the harp also has this thing of folk really think you're maybe playing some child's version of the classical harp. And you have to kind of educate them into sort of the history of these things. So this is a tune that I absolutely love, that was written by a friend of mine called Wendy Stewart, because of course now we've got so many more harp players, new tunes are being composed and in the tradition. And of course we lost a lot because it was an oral tradition. So many of the tunes that used to be played in the past by the ancient harpers, were lost because they were passed on from one generation to next. And there's some that we still have, but it's that kind of thing of we're now building up a new oral tradition, if you will, of tunes. This is called Cairnwater. It's by Wendy Stewart.
Oh, it's beautiful. Such a fabulous sound with the harp,
Yeah, it's got kind of, it's just, it's kind of one of those instruments that you can do a lot of things with. And I mean, you can't, I envy fiddle players, and especially when I hear some of like the Wrigley sisters, is it Hazel that's the fiddle player? Anyways,
it's Jennifer, yeah.
Jennifer's the fiddle player. Yeah. And she's just, when I hear the Shetland fiddlers and, some of these, and oh my goodness, I just was like, I want to be a fiddle player. It's so much more exciting than a harp player. But then again, I did try to play the violin when I was tiny, and it was a complete disaster. So, I think there is sometimes when you get somebody who, I get children in schools that I teach, and the harp might not be for them, but they're very musical. And I just always hope that they find the right instrument, because I think, there's an instrument for everyone that has that kind of musicality in their bones.
I've never found any. The one thing, though, with storytelling is that you get a phone call, because I've done a lot of work in schools as well, of course, through the museum. And you get a phone call and then say, could you come in such a date and tell some stories? And you go, yeah, sure, fine, no problem. And then the teacher says, I should warn you. And that's the point where I stopped them. And I said, look, I'll just stop you there, because whatever kid you're going to warn me about is probably going to be the one that gets most out of that session.
I agree.
Any of the rest of them.
Yeah, no, I've had such amazing experiences with that, where there was a primary school in Haddington which was really unusual. I actually did a session for them one year, and the following year I went back to the same school, which doesn't usually happen. And it was a class that the problem class, they actually remembered some of the stories I had told them the year before, and you could see the teacher's jaw just drop, because, these were and in fact, they're the ones that are, the cheeky ones. The ones that are the problem ones are often the ones that you have that really get a lot out of that session. And because I'm sure, you want to talk to the kids. It's not just a show or an entertainment session. It's about kind of like asking them, what do you think about this? Or do you know what that word means? And do or asking them riddles or things like that, and getting that sort of back and forth. And some of them that struggle maybe with reading and writing, but they are very intelligent, and they respond so well to the oral sort of storytelling tradition. It's good fun.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I'm dyslexic, so I understand, that some kids struggle with school because it's a discipline that is kind of alien to them, the whole concept of it. But when you get somebody coming in that's just telling you stories, they're not reading from a book. It's not like lessons. You're not being taught something like, now you do it,
Yeah.
Or here is a problem you have to solve.
Yeah.
It's just a story. And that bridges all the gaps. And there was one kid, the number of times then later that they say, I've never seen them, that kid, never seen him sitting so quietly. And there was one wee boy who I knew was going to be the problem one, because, I didn't know he was going to be a problem one.
No, but it's so you can,
but when he left, he says, he said, can you tell me another story? So I just told him this really, really quick, tiny little, story. And he was so chuffed because he got an extra story, And it's really important. Luckily as well, I was in the local primary school here in Stromness last Monday, just a week ago. Because I've retired doesn't mean to say I'm off the hook. You still
of course not.
Still get pulled in. And you do it because it's the right thing to do,
it totally is. And, it's an interesting thing about, when people, I remember doing, how people listen, how people, and sometimes you can think somebody's not paying attention or what have you, but they're actually the ones that are soaking it in. And I remember during COVID, I had to do a storytelling session for a school, and actually all the children were at home online, but it was the class, that was, and there was this one boy that just sat sideways, so I could only see a sort of profile of this figure. Didn't move, didn't do anything until the very end. And then I had told one of, I suppose because it was a story, some of the Anansi stories about Nancy the spider, which are, have that origin of Jamaica and what have you. But I used to hear them a lot when I was a child. I think because of that whole thing, the community, as I was saying, with Chicago and that area, that there was a lot of African storytellers. And so it's and Nancy the spider is a great character and kids respond to some of the absolute stupid things he gets up to. And so I told an Anansi story. And at the end of the session, this wee boy proceeded to tell me an Anansi story that he had heard from another storyteller a long time ago. And what a treat to get a child to actually give you the gift of responding through telling, getting a chance to tell a story to you. And it was just, I love things like that happen sometimes, and you realize that this is actually is such an important thing for these bairns, to hear, to learn in different ways.
Some schools are very creative with it as well, because they pull in different disciplines. So you have the creative writing side of it, making up a new story, and also illustrating it. You can do you can storyboard it, or you can just do a picture about it. But the one school was putting together, 2 or 3 kids, which was great, because that meant that they were pals. They could back each other up. It wasn't you standing there on your own with a spotlight on you. And it's like, right now, tell us the story that you came up with. And, like rabbit in the headlights, So you've got your pals there. They would tell one bit of the story, you tell another bit, and the third one would tell another bit, back to the first, And this one group, I made a note of the story, because it was about a troll called Mr. Troll, aka Pickles. And he was really, really ugly, and he had mold in his belly button.
Brilliant.
And he had, I can't remember, he's like saved a fairy or something. And the wish that he was granted was he took for his girlfriend to make her beautiful.
Oh.
And so his girlfriend became beautiful, and then she dumped him because he was like so ugly. And she ran off with another troll that looked like Elvis.
Oh my goodness.
Then the other troll tries then the same magic spell to make himself handsome, and it backfires, and he ends up being 10 times uglier and with even more mold in his belly button. So then it ended up with, he just beat up the Elvis lookalike, and that was the end of the story, And it's like, it's just so funny,
Yeah.
And they were just loving it, because there was 3 girls, and they were just sitting there, and they were absolutely
just having a great time,
telling the story, and everybody laughing.
Well, that's the thing, because I think, storytelling, you're playing with language and with your imagination and just having fun. It's just, that's what it should be about, making up your own stories, but also, when you're getting a chance to tell stories, you can create you're putting in your own imagination, the way you describe something, the way that you tell it. And, I find, teaching music, it's this kind of trying to get the balance. When you're teaching an instrument, you have to teach technique. You have to teach certain things that have to be, there's a certain amount of discipline or whatever, but trying to get past, get the chance to play, just to try things out, just make up nonsense, like rubbish, and just, like that whole thing. It's because none of it's rubbish. It's all wonderful. It's just that because there's no right or wrong. And it's the same with the story, is that, you can, and we need more of that in the world, I think, rather than, people telling you that you've failed or passed something. It's like, well, times where you just need to just try out things and have fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, follow your own rules, follow your own route, and see where it takes you, Do you have any favorite stories that you would maybe like, a favorite story you'd like to share? Or
favorite story? Just any? Yeah,
anything at all that you fancy, that you want, that you really enjoy telling, that you would like to share with
that's
our listener. Singular
listener. Oh gosh, there's that's a hard question, because there's always loads of stories. Well, I mean, I'm gonna try it. If I try and rearrange myself, I'll try and I'd quite like. Could I tell one of Lawrence's?
Yeah, would that be all right? Anything you like.
Okay, because this is one that I would use the harp with. So, So, long ago, on the island of Yule in Shetland, there was a fisherman called Tam. And he went down one day, start his work for the day, and he sort of got to his boat where it was moored, and he got in, and he was kind of looking around, making sure everything was where it should be. And when he noticed that some things were not quite the same as the way he'd left them the night before. So, the way that he rolled up the sheets, which in the ropes, it'd been done a wee bit differently than he would do. And there was a few other things just in slightly different places. And he thought, that's odd. But he thought, oh, it's fine. Somebody's just borrowed the boat. Sometimes folk did. It didn't matter as long as you took care. And there was nothing harmed. So he didn't think anything of it. And away he went to the fishing. Had a great day. Came back with a load of fish. A big, huge pile of fish. Fair chuffed. And next day, back to his boat. Once again, things were slightly disarranged. Oh, that's really odd that somebody would have borrowed my boat again and not said a word to me. But it was fine, nothing was harmed. Away he went. Again, he had an amazing day at the fishing. And he came back, put everything right, and he didn't know what to think, whether he should hang about and see if anyone came along. But nah, he needed to get back and deal with the fish. But the next day, the same thing. He thought, oh, this is ridiculous. Why is no one saying anything to me? So when he got back from the fishing that day, again with a good catch of fish, he went by the pub and he asked round some of the men that were there, has anyone been, borrowing my boat? They all looked at him and said, Tom, no, not heard anyone needing a boat. None of us borrowed your boat. So he went home and he dealt with the fish, and then he was sitting there in front of the fire that night. He thought, I've got to find out. He was just really curious. He just wanted to know. So he made his way back down to the boat just as the sun was setting. Not a soul on the beach. Clambered into his boat and he looked around for a place to kind of make himself comfortable, because he didn't know if the person was coming to take the boat again or when, if they did. So he kind of put the oilskins and some of the nets and made a sort of kind of little bed, little seat there, and made himself comfortable. And he waited. And the hours passed. He was tired. He'd been up all day, fishing, working hard. And it wasn't long before he fell fast asleep. Something woke him. There was a sort of crunch. And he sat up and he looked about. Now, while he was asleep, the mist, the fog, the har, as we like to call it, had come down and completely covered the beach area. Couldn't see anything. Thick fog. But he could hear a crunching of footsteps along the shingle of the beach. He kind of pulled himself back into the shadows and he looked and he watched. And through the swirling fog, he suddenly spotted 3 figures striding across this beach. And as he got closer, he thought they were awfully odd looking. They had long coats on, they had sort of boots, and it looked like they had swords strapped to their belts, sort of swinging as they walked. They had long beards, long hair. he was thinking to himself, you know, those clothes, that reminds me of some of the old clothes up in the attic, as when I was a bairn, we used to dress up like pirates, and it was great granddad's clothes, you know, and he thought, that's odd. Why be wearing stuff like that these days? There was something about them that he didn't like to confront them, so he couldn't escape, couldn't run away, so he just pulled himself further and further back into the shadows of the boat and kind of covered himself up with the oilskins and the nets. Then he felt the boat rock as somebody leapt in, and then another person, and then a third person. And then one of them got out and kind of, you know, fiddled with the ropes and things. And he could feel the boat moving on the sand, on the shingle, and it was being pushed down into the water. And then the person leapt back in, and then there was the jingle of the rowlocks as the oars were put into place. And then suddenly he felt the pull of the oars, and the boat shot off into the water. And they were moving along so fast that boat was going, just shooting through the water. It was like it was flying like a bird in the sky, and on that boat went, faster and faster and faster, until suddenly it hit the shore. Somebody leapt out. The boat was pulled up the beach, and the men leapt out. All of this had been done without a word spoken between any of them. Just the sounds that he could hear of them moving. And then he could hear the crunch of the footsteps moving away from the boat. Well, he stayed there for a bit, but eventually he got, you know, a bit braver, and he peeked out from under those nets. He was astounded, because he was nowhere where he'd ever been before. He'd never been on that beach before, and it was clear. There was no fog. You could see everything up and down this stretch of shoreline. I didn't recognise it. I thought, oh gosh, where am I? He thought he knew every single island and a piece of shoreline anywhere with sailing distance from Yell. Where were they? Then he could see the three figures moving away across the land. They were headed towards a cliff, and there was a sort of dark sort of space there, and realised it was the entrance to a cave. They must have had a lantern waiting, because suddenly there was a bright light and the swing of the lantern, and then the men moved into that dark space, and gradually the light faded and disappeared. So Tam leapt out of the boat and he started to explore, because he was like, this is such a strange place. Where could I be? But it wasn't long before he saw the light again, very faintly and gradually getting brighter, and he knew that the men were coming out of the cave. So he leapt back into the boat, back under the nets. Could hear them coming closer. But he had seen, before he covered himself up, he could see them. And they'd come out of the cave, but they were carrying so many things. They had bags and barrels and chests that they were carrying, and they were very heavily laden. And they were making their way much, much slower with all these things that they had obviously taken out of the cave. And he could hear things being thrown into the boat, and then two of the men jumped in, the other pushed the boat into the water. And once again, the oars pulled the boat into the water, and away it went. Flying across the water. And on and on. Faster and faster. They went. Until again, they hit land. Now, when the boat was pulled up onto the beach for the first time, the men started to speak. And at first, Tam was finding it difficult to understand what they were saying. There's something familiar about the words that they were saying, but he thought it was another language. But then after a while, he got his ear in and he realised it was the old way of speaking, the old Norn. It was the way his grandfather and his mates used to, when they were sitting down there smoking their pipes beside the boats in the harbour. And when he was a little lad, he used to run down there and he'd sit with them to listen to the old stories about all the adventures that they'd have. And they'd use these words, these old words. And so he realised he did understand what these men were saying. And they were talking about how grateful they were that Tam had loaned them his boat. Fine boat this. I mean, Tam doesn't know we've borrowed it, but he's a good lad all the same. A grand wee boat this was. It's a shame we can't get any more things out of that cave, said one. There's a lot still left. Aye, but this was our last night. We just, we got as much as we could, and thanks to Tam and his boat. We should give him something as a gift, as a thank you, said one. There's a chink of glass that sort of landed at the bottom of the boat. And then, one by one, they got out of the boat. And again, Tam could hear the crunching of the footsteps as they moved away. After a wee while, he kind of peeked out again, and there he saw these figures moving through the haar, through the fog. And very slowly, they moved away with their barrels and their chests and bags of goodness knows what. And then they faded away and they were gone. They just vanished. Then Tam realised that there was something knocking at his foot at the bottom of the boat, and he looked down, and there were 3 bottles. Old glass bottles, the kind, the old-fashioned glass. And they were covered in barnacles. I mean, they were just amazing looking things. And he took them home, and when he opened them, inside was the finest whiskey that he had ever tasted. Oh, it was just pure nectar. I mean, it was beautiful stuff. Well, Tam, for the rest of his days, was convinced that those men had been ghosts of smugglers, old pirates and smugglers of the past. And they'd been getting some of their ill-gotten goods out of that cavern. He spent the rest of his life, whenever he went out in his boat, trying to find that beach where that cave was, to get some more of that whiskey. But never did find it. But I tell you one thing, though, that he was rewarded in another way, because every time he went out fishing, Tam always brought back a fine boatload of fish. And he was known as the luckiest fisherman in the whole of Shetland. And that was one of Lawrence's stories that I'm very fond of.
It's a fabulous story.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
Great stuff. We had a kind of similar one for here, for Winnick Bay in South Ronaldsay, where there was a man noticed that his boat was, it wasn't tied up the way that he'd left it. He was very particular about the knots he used.
As you would be, yeah.
So he hid on the boat and he pulled a sail over him, an old sail, and he hid under it, waiting to see who was going to come and take his boat. And he had all these footsteps around him, and he could feel the boat being pushed. And when he peeped out, to his horror, it was the Trows. It was the fairy folk that were going for.
Aye.
And they
Good.
pushed it out, and they sailed way out to land, and there was one of them had a spoon, and he leaned over the side of the boat, and he took a spoonful of the water and sipped it, and he went, "Nah, no fish here." So they carried on going,
Oh,
and then again,
brilliant.
this one leaned over the side with a spoon, and he took some of the seawater and slurped it, and went, "Nah, no fish here either." So they went further out, and he dipped the spoon in the sea and took a sip, and he goes, "There's plenty fish here." So they started fishing, and they got a massive catch. And the man that was hiding under the sailcloth was able to get the meads, which is the sight lines of
Aye.
where he was. So you would line up, like a headland way, a house or a hill or something like that. So that when the one was, positioned in front of the other one, you knew where it was.
You knew then where to go back to.
Yeah, so then
Oh, brilliant.
he had that. They went back ashore, secured the boat up, tied it their way, took all the fish and went off. And after that, they never borrowed his boat again. But he'd learnt where that fishing ground was.
A good fishing ground was.
Always one that provided lots of fish.
What a great story. One thing that I'm reminded that this conference was such a joy, Tom, to see you and to chat about things and but one of the things that I've always loved about spending time with you and Lawrence, and also Bob Pegg is a good example, and there's other storytellers that I know that's the same, but that whole kind of thing that yes, we would spend a lot of time after a storytelling performance or whatever, sitting around telling stories. That's what we all would do, is this constant stories. Made it really hard to go to bed. I remember, like desperately needing to get to bed, but not wanting to miss a story. So, that's the way of it. But what I loved, even, when we were on a stage or something, is that whole kind of, bouncing off of each other. So, you'd have, I would, have an idea of what stories I might like to tell in that situation or that place. But then, somebody told a story that reminded me of something else, then that was the story I would tell. And just that kind of feeling that even though you're on a stage, you're still around the kitchen table or, in front of the fire and having that kind of freedom to just do storytelling in that way, rather than having something that is set in stone. And, there are, that is another way, some people are more that way, that they want to have everything decided ahead of time for a performance. And that is one of the things that is kind of a funny thing that's happening now with the storytelling world, is that, more and more people talk about, and I think it's to do with like the festival and stuff, people talk about a show, which we would never ever have used that term for a and I find it quite odd. And I've found myself actually saying that, using that word for a performance that I've done, and then that just makes me squirm a bit. But it's just funny that.
A lot of these days tends to be, there's not so much a theme, but there's actually like a script, So it's about something or other, it's a specific theme, but it's like a show built around that. So it would be the same stories told the same way, in the same order. And I hate that,
Yeah, I mean, I've done, saying that, I have done, because I've done a lot of work with B. Ferguson with, there's a collection of stories called Ottiswire, was a woman that lived, last century, in the 1900s. She was born very late 1800s, but she published, 4 books in the, 1950s and 60s, and they were stories that she'd collected through her lifetime, stories that she'd been told as a child living in the sort of Inverness, and also from all her family that were from Skye, because she spent her summers on Skye. And they're wonderful, wonderful collections of stories, amazing. And so we've been trying to, tell these stories, and there's hundreds of stories. And so we have had to kind of, choose different things and try and fit them into, because when you're being told you have an hour and you have to kind of try and decide how you're going to do that. And so we have done a little bit of that, but I still feel that at least as long as I'm able to tell an individual story my own way, which means that it's not going to be the same. Any, like if you heard me tell any story a second time, it will not be exactly the same. I mean, it will be the same story, but I'm not going to, then at least I've got that freedom. Even if we feel that we have to have the same stories because it makes sense for the hour. But that's why all the times that I've worked with yourself and Lawrence and Bob Pegg and folk like yourselves, I've loved that freedom of it just being, we just start and we pass on things one to another.
The story that needs to be told will come along. And
and that too. Do you get, that thing of, do you sometimes have a story that just pops up and it's kind of like telling you it needs to be told?
Yeah.
It's kind of like rapping on the door saying, you've got to tell me tonight or today. I love that when it happens.
I've had times, there was once in particular in Norway where not only did I not know what story I was going to tell, but I was standing in front of a microphone and people were looking at me expecting a story, and I thought, I fucking clue what I'm doing. And I said, this story will come as a surprise to me as well as you, because I don't know what I'm going to tell. And then I just grabbed one out of the air and told it. But I know Liz Weir was saying to me that once that when she works in some places in America, they want to know what stories you're going to tell and how long the story is going to be to the
I hate what people
second. Ask. And it's and this is 18 months in advance.
No. That's impossible.
Not how you do it.
Yeah. No, I have had, not quite as bad as that, but I've had people, and that whole thing of putting a timing, people ask you how long that story is. It's like, I don't know. And in fact, a lot of my stories, and, we've all done this where, especially if you're working in the schools, you start telling stories and you have to finish when the bell goes. Otherwise, kids are going to run out of the classroom. You have to actually get to the end of the story. So there's times where I've started something, and then suddenly thought, oh gosh, right, that story is quite a long one. And I started, I've only got 5 more minutes. How do I get to the end and still have it? So, you learn how to sort of still give the story justice, but
you edit it in your head.
Aye, because you've got that, because it's not a memorized script, you can actually then there's some days where a story that normally I could tell in 7 minutes, just because, I don't know, I'm in that mood, it might be a 12-minute story. And I hate the idea of being it has to be a certain length. And I do, yeah, I don't know, it's a funny one that yeah.
Well, thank God that there's still folk like you and me around that just have no rules, and it's just you tell a story because that's the story that needs to be told in that moment, None of this kind of, having a set list, it's not, you're not a band doing your hits,
let's do the album. Yeah, because we'll tell our album stories. But no, it was, I also find that there's some stories that I don't feel that I can do justice to, that are not my stories to tell. And, but there's some of them are some that I absolutely adore listening to. So when I'm somewhere and somebody starts telling that particular story, I am just so happy. It's like, oh, thank, it's a story I love to hear somebody tell, but I I don't know. It's just not, and it's not, doesn't feel like comfortable to tell myself. And I find that really interesting, how that is. And I think that is important too, is to understand what stories kind of are for you to tell.
Well, I wouldn't take something from somebody else's culture.
No. That's especially, like native peoples. You have to.
But funnily enough, for me and Lawrence, one story of his that I would not touch is Jan Tate and the Bear. Because that's Lawrence's story.
No, yes, same here. And also because I'm afraid because I heard somebody else tell it recently. I can't remember where. And I mean, not to say, they did a great job, but I found it really difficult to listen to, because to me it was like Lawrence's story.
Lawrence said that he
had such a way of telling that.
Lawrence said he would never tell the Stewart one because he always associated that with me. It was me story. And, and it's like, no, but it's perfectly fine. Tell it. I'm happy for anybody to tell it, It's not like copyright on the bloody thing. It's there for everybody. But he would say, no, that's your story. I would never attempt it. Because he says, I would never be able to do it like you do it. And I said, well, it's exactly the same with Jan Tate and the Bear, where you, I wouldn't have do it because I wouldn't feel that I would. I could say the words in the right order and stuff like that, but it's just, it's.
But he just
personally, I always associate with him.
His voice, the way he's described, kind of some of the sort of like details were just so brilliant, and nobody could do that. Oh yeah, no, it's good that.
Well, I suppose I've taken up much more of your time than I was. Well, nah, that's a lie. I was intended to talk up a lot of your time. That was always the goal.
That was always the goal. Good.
Yeah, that we have taken up a lot of your time, and you'll have things to do. And
well, it's just an absolute joy to get a chance to blether with you and have a chat, because we never really do these days. If I see you at the storytelling festival, it's amongst crowds of folk, and we're both also going in different directions, and or we're attending something together, but we're there in a queue to get into the theatre or what have you, and it's not the same. You can't just get caught up on.
I know. It's right
on
fun.
Memories.
Have a blether right enough, and so I'm doing in August. No, I'm not. I'm doing in May the 7th. I'm doing a 2 wee things in Edinburgh actually. So might run into you.
Yeah, look out for that.
So I'm doing a thing with Dougie Mackay, but also before that, just
fantastic.
Doing I don't know what I'm doing. It won't be what I'm told, whatever, because I don't do that.
I
do what I. Nah, well, speaking of
good. I'll look out for that.
Storytelling and tell a couple of stories, sort of things. Anyway, Heather, it's been an absolute delight speaking to you.
Same here, and
keep telling those stories and keep playing that beautiful harp. It's just.
Oh, I will. I promise.
You heard it here, folks. She promised. We've got it on tape. Well, not tape, but
yeah, recorded.
Yeah. Anyway, Heather Yule, thank you so much for giving your time and sharing your stories and your beautiful music with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. And I just, it's such a joy to be able to even if I can't see you in person or have a chat, I can at least get onto the website and hear your beautiful, amazing voice and your stories as well. So thank you for all that you and Rhonda do. It's amazing to have this this chance to hear you as well.
Kind of you to say so. Thanks very much. Right, well,
Okay.
Good night, folks. And
Bye.
we'll see you again sometime when the moon's full.